loans and controlling their rebuilding process in a way that still continues to benefit those very same nations that left them in this horrible condition to begin with.
What do Thomas Paine, Rosa Parks, Albert Einstein, Helen Keller, John Steinbeck, George Orwell, Pablo Picasso,
They're all socialists. Sorry, I had to say it.
Nelson Mandela, Bertrand Russell, and Martin Luther King Jr. all have in common?
They're all Democratic.
These historical figures, among many others, are routinely taught about in American schools. They're all praised for their various contributions, whether artistic, societal, governmental.
They're all socialists, and they never fucking mention that in any... You just, for the first time, fucking found that out just in this video. A lot of you, for the first time, just fucking found that out. Yes, Einstein was as well.
Or scientific, and they're all generally portrayed as good, virtuous, and intelligent people. But they also have one more thing in common. Something that's never mentioned in American schools. They were all socialists. In this episode, we're going to take a brief look at how history, especially American history, tends to whitewash radical figures, and why it's done. This video could easily be an hour long, but since I have analytics that show me just how long the average person watches, I'm going to try to keep this short. With that in mind, we're only going to look at a couple of the many historical figures who have had their radical past defanged by imperialist history. Let's start way back in the earliest days of the United States. These days, it can be pretty hard to find anything to like about modern politicians in the US, with many Americans complaining that, in decades past, those who ran for office possessed integrity and unimpeachable morals that current candidates lack. The further back most people look, the more wistful they seem to become.
When are you gonna stop pretending you haven't watched these videos? I love that. It's a very nice compliment. It is a very nice compliment. So thank you.
As I briefly discussed in my episode on the Electoral College, Americans tend to treat the Founding Fathers especially as these almost mythical figures who had their best interest at heart and that could do no wrong. In reality, they were people just like the rest of us. And people, then and now, aren't perfect. Some of you may be aware and appalled that, for example, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, among others, owned slaves, and believed in the superiority of the European white man. Other Americans might not care about these flaws and just brush off those beliefs as a sign of the times. But not everyone who helped shape the country had such disappointing values that are contemptible in the modern era. If you do a little digging, one of the Founding Fathers in particular stood above the rest, dramatically ahead of his time, a champion of real equality as well as American independence. Thomas Paine. From the days of his youth in England, Thomas Paine had been dedicated to improving the lives of average people and the poor. He volunteered at his church to collect money to distribute to the needy. He was once fired from his job as a tax collector after advocating for better pay and striking over the matter. After he made his way to the American colonies in 1774, Paine found a position as editor of the Pennsylvania Magazine, where he advocated for the abolition of slavery almost a full century before the practice was actually banned in the US. You may be thinking, wait a minute, could Thomas Paine really have been a socialist all the way back in the 1770s? That's a fair question, as many people consider the beginning of socialism as a distinct ideology to be sometime around the French Revolution of 1789. While he may not have had the terminology we associate with socialism today, Paine checked all the boxes, so we could technically call him a proto-socialist, in that he followed a set of values that had not necessarily been fully codified. Paine was deeply concerned for the world's poor, he was staunchly against the British rule of the American colonies, and he dedicated his life to fostering a revolutionary spirit among his readers, first in the colonies and then.
His take on Washington was literally horrendous. Washington's ideas were far beyond his time, and not to mention he treated his slaves extremely fairly and freed many of them. No, he didn't. You're literally wrong. You're completely incorrect. And it's fine. At least you admit that fucking Washington owned slaves. Some people don't. First of all, there is no such thing as like treating your slaves fairly. Okay? The only person who treats their slaves fairly is the person who immediately frees them if those slaves are given to them, you know, in the process of like a parent dying or some shit. Okay? That's one. Two, George Washington did not treat his slaves fairly, even if there was such a thing as treating slaves fairly, like not raping them in the same way that Jefferson did, for example. He knew very well that slavery was immoral. Not only did he know that slavery was immoral, he absolutely took advantage of loopholes to ensure that he never had to free his slaves. He would take advantage of a loophole where he would move his slaves from, I think, Pennsylvania. He would move his slaves across state lines every 6 months to ensure that they never had to be freed, because there was a law back then where you could only have slaves for 6 months, where George Washington was. So, no, he knew it was bad, and yes, he kept doing it, and he absolutely did not treat his slaves fairly. Such a concept does not even exist, by the way. So, come on. There's no such thing as like ethical slavery. What kind of libertarian mentality is this? So, yeah. Well, back then, if you were freed, though, they would go back into the system, I am sure, at least having them being kind to them, provided with a safe place. No, that's not fucking... No, that's bullshit as well. Oh, the situation was worse off for them free is a ridiculous fucking take.
Than abroad. His most well-known pamphlet, Common Sense, decries rulers and those who...
I don't understand how you guys are... I don't know how you guys are fucking having this take. Like, it's just nuts. Every conversation that we have around the ethics of slavery, unfortunately, oftentimes revolves around whether the founding fathers thought it was good or bad, and it literally overlooks the slaves themselves. We, whenever we try to have a conversation about slavery, literally do not think of the slaves as human beings. If you ask the fucking slaves, I don't think they would be like, this is actually pretty good or this is actually pretty bad. They would not want to be slaves. The enslaved people's... Man, okay. Really? Like, that's the fucking corrective behavior that you want to engage in this conversation? Like, do you think I'm on... Oh, yikes, dude.
Lust for power, saying, men who look upon themselves born to reign and others to obey soon grow insolent. Selected from the rest of mankind, their minds are early poisoned by importance, and the world they act in differs so materially from the world at large that they have but little opportunity of knowing its true interests, and when they succeed to the government, are frequently the most ignorant and unfit of any throughout the dominions. Once the Revolutionary War was over and the Founding Fathers had settled into positions of power, Paine was expelled from government and labeled unpatriotic for rightly accusing a fellow diplomat of war profiteering. Not content with having freed just one nation from hereditary rule, Paine was determined to do the same thing in France during their own revolution. From his home in London, and against the will of both the British and French governments, Paine published The Rights...
I don't comment much, but to be the devil's advocate from last take, slave life is all they know. How could they want anything else? Do you guys think that, like, the abolition movement started on its own or something? Like, do you think that it was a white man's burden, where a white man finally said, let's free these slaves? Is that how it works? If enslaved peoples, if all they knew was being a slave, a lifetime of subjugation to slavery, then why the fuck did you need slave drivers? Why did you need to whip them? Oh, it turns out people don't want to fucking do that, okay? People don't want to fucking do this shit. There's no devil's advocate in this situation. That's literally how it happened. White men decided to free them. What? Can you tell me why you're trying to cultivate a political religion? Bro. Yo, dude, you gotta clap that. Like, you gotta, I can't even, it's such a fucking brain disease that I don't know how to describe. I don't know how to fucking respond to that. Like, white people played a fundamental role in the abolition of slavery. But this notion that, like, it was the white man who fucking decided it's time now is ridiculous. And just like slavery is all they know as a justification for what black people wanted back then, is again talking over the opinions of those people and dehumanizing them and looking at them as a product. to consume rather than actual fully fledged human beings, you would literally never, ever in a million years talk about anyone or anything else in the same way. You would never use this language. You would never just say that. Oh, well, what about fucking sex slaves? Like, that's all they know. All they know is being trafficked. Like, that's all their life is. Like, would you ever fucking behave that way? Absolutely not. You would never say that.
Of man, which demanded the universal acknowledgement of inalienable rights to the entire population, and proposed systems to allow for these rights to flourish. Those systems—
I'm black, I love you, but it's wild that I'm learning more from watching you about my own history in my public school. Yeah, well, that's on purpose.
Included universal welfare, child
I'm gonna play
care,
with XQC
education,
in a
and
bit.
pension.
I'm still eating.
Years later, having burned all his bridges with the leadership of Britain, France, and the US, Paine died penniless and alone in New York. Only 6 people attended his funeral. Today, a plaque commemorates the site in New York, reading in part, "The world is my country. All mankind are my brethren. To do good is my religion." Thomas Paine was not only more progressive than those of his time, he was more progressive than even many Americans today. Paine opposed the concept of private ownership of land, and admired the Iroquois nation for living sustainably and democratically. He supported universal suffrage, the right of workers to control the capital they used, and was the first notable American to propose the implementation of UBI. Taken together, all of this essentially makes him the original American socialist, and people like Bernie Sanders follow in his centuries-old footsteps. Compare this information with what you learned about Paine in school. You probably knew he wrote Common Sense, which supported the colonial struggle against the British Crown. Odds are that's all you were taught. But let's fast forward to a more recent radical figure. Martin Luther King Jr. was, and remains to this day, the most well-known figure of the civil rights era. From 1955 until his assassination in 1968, MLK fought for desegregation, labor rights, the right for Black Americans to vote, and countless other societal reforms that today we take for granted. Just about every American is familiar with at least some of King's story. We're taught that he was a good Christian man who advocated for equal rights, and that he led a march on Washington and gave the "I Have a Dream" speech. This, of course, ended racism, and everyone lived happily ever after at the end. Obviously, that's not the case, but that's about the extent of the American education on the civil rights era. Here's the thing. Dr. King was a far more radical organizer than most people today are aware. American history books tend not to include King's later activism. He was staunchly anti-imperialist, harshly criticizing America's meddling in foreign affairs, especially in Vietnam. He was opposed to militarism and war. He rightly pointed out that poverty could be eliminated with the tools at our disposal. It was simply a matter of putting—
Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure. I'm just trying to scan. Whenever they say Vietnam, sometimes they'll show American history is so gruesome and so violent that, like, Twitch will literally not let me show you the outcome of American history. Oftentimes, so I'm just scanning through. Like, my first ban ever was around this exact same subject. Do you think MLK is not a doctor because he's actually a reverend doctor? Yes, he's a reverend. I'm pretty sure I doubt that MLK was like, you need to call me a doctor. I don't know why people, God, I don't want to get unlocked on this again. I don't know why you guys like brush over the literal argument that I'm making, which is pretentious as fuck, to like constantly correct people to be like, I'm a doctor, by the way. Or even in the same way that like Jill Biden low-key, or the Joe Biden campaign low-key did, like take advantage of her doctorate in education to make it seem like she's a fucking medical doctor, which even confused people like Whoopi Goldberg. God, a lot of you got a PhD in fucking baiting, I think.
Human life over corporate profits. When he led the Montgomery bus boycott at just 26 years old, King was already devoted to the struggle for equal rights. But, like anyone, his opinions evolved over time. As he led marches and spoke with people from all walks of life, he began to realize that the problems Black people faced in America were a symptom of a larger disease. Between 1957 and 1968, King traveled over 6 million miles, delivered more than 2,500 speeches, and was arrested and thrown in jail at least 20 times. Over that period, Dr. King developed an understanding of the way poverty, racism, militarism, and imperialism were all tangled up together in the mess we know as capitalism. He said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all God's children. Martin Luther King wasn't shy about making his political beliefs known. It's just that modern histories like to leave that part out to make King more palatable, to make him seem like a harmless do-gooder.
Bro, the shit MLK said about Ho Chi Minh, which was absolutely correct, by the way, but the stuff he said about Ho Chi Minh, if you want to troll neoliberals on the internet who like get off on talking about how much they love being the white savior of like third world countries or whatever, just literally quote the good reverend's takes on Ho Chi Minh, okay, Uncle Ho, as though they are your own, and watch them fucking tell you that you are a tanky, LARPer, racist, class reductionist. Okay? Because
16 months Pogger.
he was absolutely correct at the time for what he said. But like our understanding of MLK is that, you know, he's a good guy, and that's because he was very civil and very nonviolent, and he never said stuff that offended white people's sensibilities. Okay? Here, where is it? He was a famous speech called Beyond Vietnam. Okay? Exactly 1 year before his assassination, I think this is the one I'm thinking of. That speech entitled Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence was an unequivocal denunciation of America's involvement in Southeast Asian conflict. A time comes when silence is betrayal, King told the crowd gathered at the Riverside Baptist Church in New York. He indicated that his commitment to nonviolence left him little choice. I knew that I never again would raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, my own government. He gave an anti-war speech in February 1967, but that sentiment was often described as pro-communist in America, that is, in the midst of the Cold War. So King spoke again 2 months later to ensure his position was clear. King carefully laid out the history of the nation's involvement in Vietnam. He started in 1945, when Vietnam's Prime Minister Ho Chi Minh overthrew the Japanese and French. He carried his audience through American support for France's effort to regain his former colony. The only change from America as we increased our troop commitments in support of the governments, which were singularly corrupt, inept, and without popular support. Now they languish under our bombs and consider us, not their fellow Vietnamese, the real enemy. Okay, this is not showing some of the more radical parts. I'm not going to make you watch it's a 56-minute speech, or it's a long-ass speech. Look at what Chunk Yogurt said. MLK also beat his wife, but he's still praised by white guilt SJWs. Classic. I mean, when you're a racist and you have nothing else, you're like, oh, well, he beat his wife. It's ironic because normally that kind of behavior is something that, you know, if it's one of your figures that you would appreciate. That's something that you would criticize the SJWs over. Like when some people were saying that Frederick Douglass left his black wife and went and married a white woman, and therefore, like, his accomplishments are, I think, diminished, or rather, that he should be criticized for it. Like, it's just a way that, like, that's a bad take overall, right? It's just a way to fucking try to launch criticisms at someone. And sometimes when progressive people do it, I shit on them. When Republicans do it, though, or when conservatives do it, they literally do it because they just can't openly say it. Because he's a pussy, and he can't say, like, he can't call Martin Luther King the N-word, right? Because he's too big of a pussy. He has to turn around and be like, oh, he beat his wife or some shit. Yeah, gotta attack the character. Yeah. People that own slaves, good. Profoundly important figures. Oh, by the way, the beat his wife thing is beat his wife thing with MLK is like, I don't know how. I mean, I think he was regarded as a bit of a misogynist, but most of that shit is FBI propaganda, including the fact that they tried to blackmail him It's definitely. I don't know. I don't think he was. I don't think he ever like beat his wife or anything. I'm not. I'm uncertain though, but I might be. He cheated on her, not beat her. No, the FBI, the womanizer thing is not a CIA psyop or FBI. The part of it is the part of this convo that is like completely made up is the part of this conversation that was completely fucking made up is the stuff that he was like doing. He was engaging in like sexual activities that at the time would be deemed degenerate. And that was all fucking blackmail from the FBI. It was made up. And by the way, none of that matters. Like literally none of that matters. It doesn't matter. I don't give a fuck that he cheated on his wife. I'm sorry. Like, sorry. Like, I don't care. I literally don't care. Yeah, FBI did send him blackmail letters saying, who now celebrate him, by the way, who celebrate him on, you know, on his day of remembrance, but concerning black women and the way that civil rights affect us, we have to realize that some of these figures do work entirely for our liberation. So although we are thankful for what progress we had, it's just a conscious punch, a continuous punch in the gut. The progressive movements continue to neglect us. You're right. And oftentimes history does overlook the contributions of black women specifically, right? As it highlights the efforts that black men have had. However, having said that, they were just fucking misogynistic.
Your life. Much appreciated.
They are, to a certain degree, a product of their own. Like, it's not a good thing, right? I'm not saying it's a good thing, but they are a product of their upbringing.
Who just wanted black people to be able to vote and drink from the same water fountains as white people. That's not who Dr. King was. He preached a message of love and equality, but he was outspoken about the problems plaguing America. He called the US the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, a claim which has only become more and more obviously true over the decades. He condemned the nation's military action against Vietnam, saying, "The bombs in Vietnam explode at home. They destroy the hopes and possibilities for a decent America." This was absolutely true. The money we spent on that pointless, destructive war could have been far better spent at home, improving the lives of everyday Americans of all races, because, as King noted, Negroes are not the only poor in the nation. There are nearly twice as many white poor as Negro, and therefore the struggle against poverty is not involved solely with color or racial discrimination, but with—
Wow, what a class reductionist, dude! Wow. MLK is such a class reductionist, dude. He's even using the N-word. Not a good look, Sweaty. I'm a white guy who's a neoliberal and has a globe emoji on his Twitter account, by the way, so I know better.
with elementary economic justice. Dr.
Class reduction is tanky.
King would continue to speak on behalf of the poor, downtrodden, and forgotten, and not just those in America, but around the world, until the end of his life. In 1968, the year of his death, King said in an interview, "For years I labored with the idea of reforming the existing institutions of society. A little change here, a little change there. Now I feel quite differently. I think you've got to have a reconstruction of the entire society, a revolution of values." He knew that milquetoast reforms and compromise would never be sufficient to save the country, and that radical change was needed. Because of this, while traveling to support striking sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, Dr. King was murdered. At the time of his death, he had just a 30% approval rating among Americans. This is in stark contrast with the rosy picture of an American hero we're shown in school. We're taught that most Americans respected MLK, and that he changed their minds. Clearly,
no.
Our education system is a little lacking in the accuracy department. Today, about 94% of Americans say they have a positive opinion of Dr. King. Has something in the hearts and minds of the American people changed over the years? I don't think so. I believe that the way our history is presented is intentionally misleading. It defangs our most radical figures and presents them as whitewashed icons of a generally accepted movement. Women's suffrage, civil rights, labor laws. Anytime there has been a major popular uprising in this country, our history books have picked a face to be a convenient representative, a sort of moral arbiter we can project our good feelings onto, while allowing the general population to ignore the actual mass movements that supported and carried these noble figures. It's an intentional attempt.
They used to call him a communist agitator, causing riots all around the country. So, you know, everything that you hear about Black Lives Matter right now and the legitimate grievances that Black Lives Matter protesters have, those exact same fucking arguments were launched against Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. Nearly identical. Communists, they're trained Marxists, they're agitators, they fucking hate this country, they're doing riots, they're uppity, they should know their place. Come on, it's separate but equal. All of it. And by the way, he had fucking choice words for the white moderate as well, who said, I'm going to put a fucking time on your liberation. It was not just like the fucking conservatives and the racists that Martin Luther King had words for. Okay? He also had choice words for the liberals who said, oh, I really like the idea behind your movement, but like, I just don't like the way you're saying it.
Attempt to make people believe that a single person with a nice idea is all it takes to bring about real and lasting
focusing
change.
on optics, focusing on the optics of the movement, that sort of thing.
The ironic thing is, each of the people portrayed in this way recognized and publicly acknowledged that a single person has no real power, and that a mass movement is necessary in order to force positive change. Those in power will never give up that power without a fight. We need to realize that when we're presented with an accounting of history that does not engage with all the facts, we're being subtly conditioned to constrain the scope of our worldview and our politics. Rosa Parks was a brave woman who sat where she wanted to sit. Martin Luther King was a preacher who wanted equal rights. Albert Einstein was just a really smart scientist. Picasso was just an artist. Orwell and Steinbeck were just authors. All of these people and many more have been stripped of their radical beliefs to make them acceptable for an American capitalist audience.
I don't know how the fuck you read Orwell.
Why engage with the actual
I don't know how the fuck you read Orwell and then not recognize that he's a lefty.
convictions these people held when we can just rewrite their lives to make them harmless figureheads that stand for something
Or
entirely—
not Orwell, sorry. I was thinking of a Steinbeck more than Orwell. Sorry. The Orwell one is interesting as well, but like Steinbeck is especially. George Orwell was I think George Orwell was still anti-USSR though. George Orwell was a democratic socialist, but he was not too fond of the USSR. He hated fascists, but which is oftentimes used against him now. Like if they only fucking knew, if he only like his position against like totalitarian governments, or his position against the USSR. He literally fought in a war for a true leftist. Has allowed so many capitalists to co-opt that as though he is like as though he's not anti-capitalist. Orwell was a snitch. He literally outed communists of the British government. Look up Orwell's list. Yeah, lefties fucking go in and out of liking Orwell. There's a bunch of people that won't like him, but yeah, he's a bit of an anarchitty who actually He wasn't like a fucking centrist though. That's what I'm trying to say. He was not a fucking centrist. He was definitely anti-capitalist, and this notion that he was like a pro-capitalist, anti-communist person is psychotic. It's literally anti-fascist or anti-totalitarian or anti-authoritarian. A person who himself, if I'm not mistaken, who took up arms to fight against a fascist regime is being remembered as like a fucking pro-capitalist.
Different today than what they stood for in life. The people who use Martin Luther King as an example of a quote, good black protester are choosing to engage with a version of history that does not exist, a version that has been molded to make white people not feel bad about the civil rights era. Those people need to reckon with the fact that they would have been in the 60% that held an unfavorable opinion of Dr. King in 1968. Why? Because if he were alive today, his convictions would put him on the front lines of every divisive issue that so many of these Americans take as an attack on their traditional values and the greatness of our nation. Anti-war, anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism, and a radical love for the people our predatory system has cast aside. That's why our histories whitewash radical figures, so the mass movements they represented won't inspire the next generation. So we'll feel like we could never measure up to these seemingly lone actors who effected all that change all by themselves. They weren't by themselves. They had a whole lot of normal people standing with them in solidarity, and those people don't get a page in the history books. If you'd like to learn more about any of the figures I mentioned in this video, I've left some links in the description. For Dr. King in particular, I highly recommend you check out Martin Luther King Jr. on CuriosityStream. It's a great short watch about Dr. King's contributions to the civil rights movement. CuriosityStream is an established streaming platform with a solid track record of caring about great educational content.
Great video.
Pogo.
This video was made possible by Hover. Professionalize your web presence with a custom email address for 10% off at hover.com.
What the fuck is this?
Catch, but
Ew. Ew. That dude just sent me a fucking white nationalist, like an actual straight up Nazis video. Oh my god. That's like a real fucking Nazi. I thought we had like moved past that. Watch the video. Washington was a very good person. He treated his... Do I have like do I have a bunch of like do I have like a new thread on fucking poll or something? I like that Nazis on the internet went from like, you know, doing Unite the Right rallies and like taking control of the Republican Party to coming into my chat to be like, George Washington was nice to his slaves. That's hilarious, dude. That's awesome, dude. That is awesome. That these motherfuckers went from like, here, we're gonna have fucking 10,000 people. We're gonna have 10,000 people show up to fucking Charlottesville to like, George Washington, you're saying things about him that's so mean. Oh, he was a nice slave owner.
The equilibrium is shattering. Yeah, it's broken.
What?
Hassan, the equilibrium is shattering. Yeah, it's broken. Fuck Hassan. He's a stupid bitch.
How dare you?
Hassan, the equilibrium is...
Don't worry, I'll go back to make a top tier playlist for you next week. Vietnam War from the North Vietnamese perspective, the armchair historian. What is this? Is this guy fucking awesome? You guys keep sending me his videos. How tag became a professional sport, the incredible Japanese prison break. We've seen that. We watched that already.
1 year yo hassle.
Griffin Johnson, the armchair historian. Mentioning the Vietnam War is one of the fastest ways to spark controversy in any military history community.
Oh damn, this is great.
Opinions will rage back and forth about whether or not the USA was justified in its intervention, what mistakes it made, and if America really ever had a chance of victory. But while topics such as these are very common, what is much less talked about is the perspective of the Vietnamese people during the conflict, their motivations, the agenda of their leaders, and how they endured nearly 20 years of bloody, vicious guerrilla warfare. This video will seek to explain their side of the story, as well as provide context for the stubborn spirit of resistance that enabled Vietnam to hold out against the American juggernaut despite all efforts to beat them into submission. Supporting our sponsors is the best way to support our channel. Today's video is brought to you by Conflict of Nations, a free online man coordinated 13 of the Vietnamese.
That's
To
awesome.
understand the attitude of the Vietnamese during the war, one
I think it's hilarious that the dude who like famously covers wars is doing an ad. That's good branding, dude.
must first be aware of Vietnam's history of occupation and exploitation by foreign powers. First, there was China, which spent 1,000 years trying to absorb the nation through both conquest and cultural assimilation. However, by the 19th century, China was undergoing its own negative experiences with colonialism, as powerful European empires began expanding into Asia and destroying the old status quo. With Chinese influence on the wane, it seemed as if Vietnam might have a chance to stand on its own, but a small squadron of French warships would promptly crush those hopes. Unable to resist this technologically superior foe, the Nguyen imperial dynasty ruling Vietnam at the time quickly capitulated, and by 1884 most of Vietnam had become part of the greater colonial union of French Indochina. With the Nguyen court reduced
I'm not gonna watch your favorite lefty commentator's fucking video response to this. Like, what is the the immediacy in which you like have to be like, dude, no, dude, there's misinformation in this. You gotta watch the fucking Luna Oi video instead. Fuck. Dude, stop now. No, just fucking leave.
to a puppet administration colonial governors operated with.
Can we get a permanent ban for whoever said fuck N-words in the chat? Yeah, I already did. Are you fucking stupid? You think I'd let shit like that slide?
Virtually no oversight from the French state, and were allowed to use any and all means at their disposal to suppress any hint of native resistance. Often this extended to the point of criminalizing the mere act of identifying oneself as Vietnamese. Trapped in a thoroughly miserable existence, the Vietnamese peasants were desperate for a savior, any savior. But after decades of failed revolts and horrific reprisals, the iron grip of colonialism remained as strong as ever. Yet, unbeknownst to the peasantry, the seeds of a new revolution were already being sown.
Can you ban mods? Can you hit a 10-minute on anyone who mentioned Luna Oi? Please. Maybe 19 minutes and 35 seconds.
Not in the plantations or even in the courts of the Nguyen bureaucracy, but in the coffee houses of Paris, where the few Vietnamese lucky enough to scrape together enough money to afford a Western education were debating the merits of a strange radical new ideology known as communism. Unlike any political ideology at the time, communism promised freedom and equality for those laboring under the yoke of capitalistic imperialism, and so spread like wildfire from the moment it was introduced from overseas, becoming Vietnam's dominant underground political movement by the early 1930s. Central to the communist movement in Vietnam was the unassuming son of a disgraced bureaucrat called Nguyen Sinh Quong, or as he is more commonly known, Ho Chi Minh. After leaving Vietnam sometime in the 1910s, Ho Chi Minh drifted around Europe, visiting both the United States and possibly Britain. As early as 1918, he was a dedicated anti-imperialist, joining the group of Vietnamese patriots, which petitioned the French government for independence during the Treaty of Versailles. In 1920, he was one of the many communists avidly following the progress of Vladimir Lenin's October Revolution in Russia, the success of which proved beyond any doubt that the imperialist system could be overthrown through force of arms. Inspired by Lenin's success, Ho Chi Minh chaired the first meeting of what would become the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, or
Wasn't Ho Chi Minh a Mirabeau as well? I mean, he was literally an Mirabeau. Like, no meme. I promise you, I was at some point, if I was at some point gonna watch Luna Oi's response to the video, because of all of you who literally, as soon as you see something on the internet, as soon as you see a YouTube video on the internet, you're like, no. My favorite, like, Vietnamese, I guess she's Vietnamese, commentator who's a leftist wrote an even better video on this that is 45 minutes long and has no visual fucking stimulants and will literally eviscerate. Like, might as well just end the stream at that point. But you have to watch that because it's actually better. Because, you know, it's just better. It's just like a better take on it. I'm not going to watch it. And not only am I not going to watch it, even if I were to watch it originally, I'm definitely not going to watch it now.
ICP in 1930, with the express goal of ending colonial rule of his native country. But for all of his early efforts, regime change in Vietnam would not originate with the Vietnamese, but would instead be instigated from the most unlikely of sources, Imperial Japan. In 1940, Japan invaded Vietnam as part of their efforts to establish the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, or in other words, a series of client states under imperial domination. In 1945, they officially annexed the country and expelled all Western influences, including the entire French colonial administration. Mere months later, the Japanese surrendered to the Allies, and with their collapse, Vietnam's century-old political order had come crashing down, leaving total chaos in its wake. It was during this last chaotic year of the occupation that Ho Chi Minh truly came into his own as leader. He had returned to Vietnam in 1941 to organize a major resistance movement against Japanese forces known as the Viet Minh, and by 1945 he was leading an army of at least 10,000 communist guerrillas. His long-awaited revolution began on August 15th, before even the ink on the Japanese instrument of surrender had time to dry. With the French colonial forces in Vietnam having been disarmed by the Japanese earlier that year, there was a brief window in time where the Viet Minh had free run of the entire country. But far from screaming defiance at the hated Western imperialists, Ho Chi Minh was instead positively desperate to secure a friendship with the United States. This was due in large part to the...
I'm sure this is why people were saying this video is very biased and that Ho Chi Minh is not actually an Mirabeau, or rather that that he I don't know. I'm assuming that that's the reason why people were upset.
The activities of the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, which had made contact with the Viet Minh in 1945 and selected Ho Chi Minh as their primary contact within Vietnam.
No, that isn't the reason. Okay, when it gets to the part where you're the offending part, we'll talk about it. What is an Mirabeau? It's a weeb, but for America, like me. I'm an Mirabeau.
between America and the Viet Minh was their lack of a traditional communist agenda. Despite Ho Chi Minh's unabashed belief in the ideology, his primary goal was always the liberation of Vietnam.
Or Hideo Kojima.
As he himself stated, at first patriotism, not yet communism. As a result, both Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong initially distrusted Ho Chi Minh for his unwillingness to make class warfare a priority above national freedom. This, however, struck a chord with American observers, who were naturally sympathetic to the idea of an oppressed nation throwing off the shackles of a domineering imperialist regime. Thus, OSS operatives celebrated alongside the peasantry when Ho Chi Minh declared the Democratic Republic.
This quote is why you guys are triggered. That's the reason why you want me to watch the boring video that's like 45 minutes long or whatever. Dude, y'all suck, dude. Wait, even the fucking baby's first lefty, like leftists in here are aware of what happened. Are aware of what fucking happened in Vietnam.
Telling me to share my resub in a total noob,
like the only people who think that
I have Prime, which let's be honest, even though Bezos sucks, I will have forever.
The only people who fucking don't recognize that. God damn, bro. It's a good video. There's a lot of good visual, helpful parts about it.
As a result, both Joseph Stalin and...
The video is 20 minutes, by the way. Yeah, but it doesn't have cool fucking graphics. And yes, there are literal children in here, okay? And it's boring. I haven't even seen it, but I'm almost certain it's boring. So I'm going to watch this one that's not boring instead, okay? One of them has 10,000 views. The other one has 1.3 million views. You can literally just go and write as many bread tube fucking threads about how I'm fucking fake for saying that. And all of that other shit. And how I don't give a fuck. I'll watch it on my own, and I'll let you know.
Initially distrusted Ho Chi Minh for his unwillingness to make class warfare a priority above national freedom. This, however, struck a chord with American observers, who were naturally sympathetic to the idea of an oppressed nation.
He was recently promoted by Passage. That's probably why. Who's Passage?
Throwing off the shackles of a domineering imperialist regime. Thus, OSS operatives celebrated alongside the peasantry when Ho Chi Minh declared the Democratic Republic of Vietnam on September 2nd, 1945. In his opening speech, he began with words familiar to every American.
Tất cả mọi người đều sinh ra có quyền bình đẳng, tạo hóa cho họ những quyền không ai có thể xâm phạm được. Trong những quyền ấy có quyền được sống, quyền tự do.
Behind him on the podium stood OSS Major Archimedes Patty, and as the speech came to a close, a plane bearing U.S. markings.
Bro, that's how you know the motherfucker was leftist, dude. You hear that? You hear that audio, dude? You can't even make out what he's saying. Him tailoring his own personal liberation around like the American Revolution, or what he was thought of the American Revolution, does not mean he's like an agent of the OSS. And it does not mean that he was like aligned with the American government, or it certainly does not mean that the American government was fond of him at any given point. I don't know why like you're upset. Like it was a fascination that he had. Same with the fucking fascination that I have with American culture in general.
Flew over the assembled crowd, which greeted its appearance with thunderous applause. All across the nation, Americans were seen as heroes and liberators, and for a moment, it seemed as if this would be the start of a glorious new relationship between East and West. Of course, we all know that this was never really an option. The French wanted their colonies back, and the newly elected President Truman had no interest in cooperating with an openly communist regime. After negotiations with the French broke down completely, the Vietnamese had no choice but to fight for their independence, and the First Indochina War began on December 16, 1946. During this time, the Qin dynasty attempted to reassert its control over the nation, with the 13th emperor, Bao Dai, siding with the French and resuming his place as a puppet ruler over their occupied territories. As the war dragged on, the US began sending aid to the French, but after their dramatic defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, they agreed to new negotiations with the Viet Minh. The ensuing treaty split the country in two halves, the DRV in the north and the State of Vietnam in the south. Bao Dai was then unceremoniously ousted by his prime minister, Ngo Dien Diem, after a referendum determined that the state of Vietnam should become a republic. However, this was hardly a triumph of democracy over imperialism, for Diem was utterly corrupt, and the referendum was blatantly rigged. Diem even went so far as to deliberately ignore the French promise that the South would be allowed to vote on whether or not to reunite with the North under the DRV. When it became obvious that the Diem had no intention of allowing reunification, DRV-backed insurgents began popping up all over the South, causing him to become even more anti-communist, and in turn causing America to offer increasing amounts of aid to his administration. However, Diem proved to be a fickle ally, often refusing to cooperate with his US backers, especially in regards to rural development and land management. In 1963, tensions finally came to a head when Diem was abruptly assassinated in a military coup d'etat that was aided by the CIA. This, combined with the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, paved the way for a full-scale US invasion.
Dude, I hate these people, dude. Dude, you're on the internet, you're on Twitch, you're watching a fucking YouTuber's take. Like, you're not fighting a fucking revolutionary war by correcting the record here, dude. Like, please stop. Please. Hassan, this video contains facts that are disputed by a Vietnamese person. Are you going to take the imperialist side and continue the shit on the global South? Yes. Okay? I am literally the CIA. Okay? I love the CIA. I am the CIA. I love the Western world. I'm a proud boy. Okay? That's all of it. Just please stop. Stop acting like you're I don't know. Stop acting like you're fucking like defending developing nations or something. Okay? Please. All right? The CIA planted me here on Twitch so I could subvert, infiltrate, and liberalize leftist movements. Oh my God, I know that I just said that as a joke, but there are unironically going to be people that fucking literally think like, oh no, that's the truth. I already suspected that because there are plenty of people with actual brain problems who literally fucking think this. Okay? Some people have just bad brains and they take this shit seriously and like literally think that this is how it works.
Invasion. From the outset of war, Vietnamese generals knew that a conventional victory was impossible. America was simply too powerful to defeat using traditional battlefield tactics. But the huge rural population of the South was already mostly under the sway of the DRV-backed National Liberation Front, or more commonly known as the Viet Cong, or VC. The VC, in combination with the People's Army of Vietnam, waged a successful series of campaigns against the disorganized South Vietnamese until large numbers of American troops began arriving in 1965. Following American involvement, the conflict began to shift into a war of attrition. Vietnamese defense strategy revolved around their extensive network of tunnels, which many likened more to underground cities than mere military strongholds. Over 200 miles or 321 kilometers of tunnel were dug during the war, with the largest system at Cu Che being just 20 miles or 32 kilometers outside Saigon. Their importance was summed up in the words of Colonel Chow Lam.
Okay. All the fucking, like, social democrat, Bosch, and Destiny fans need to shut the fuck up about calling everyone a goddamn tanky. Okay? I get it. You are just now, for the first time in your life in the past year or so, coming to terms with the fact that you might be an anti-capitalist, or you might admit that there are certain very glaring, very obvious flaws, okay, in our capitalist organization of the economy. Please stop calling everything a fucking tanky, okay? These are very cool terms. There's like cool aesthetics. You're captivated with that. You will look back at your first years, the baby's first steps into socialism, with and remind yourself how embarrassing it was if you keep outwardly behaving this way, okay? We've all been there at some point. So please, save yourself the embarrassment of fucking saying everything is a tanky or whatever the fuck, okay?
Hey Hussein, I'm a new viewer, but I've
And
really
again,
enjoyed
tankies
your
are fucking
content
annoying as
recently.
shit too, so
Have a
shut
great
the fuck
holiday
up
season, whatever
as well.
you celebrate or don't celebrate.
Every single person that calls me a liberal or a stooge for Western imperialists, for the most part, is usually LARPing about the October Revolution and thinks that that's the only perfect way to bring about communism. They will unironically say things like, "Oh yeah, look at me, I'm Hassan," criticizing the only successful socialist revolution in the fucking world. Okay? Those guys usually are pro-Stalin. Okay? Some of those guys are. Then there are Marxist-Leninists who, to the uneducated, untrained eye, will come across like a tanky. There's Genghis. Then there's Dengists who believe that
Shut up, Tanky.
China is in a transitional state toward China is a transitional socialist state and will bring about socialism or communism. There are a gorillion different ideas, gorillion, the same number of people that communism has personally murdered. Vladimir Stalin, who murdered 1 gorillion people single-handedly. There are a gorillion different types of lefties. They all read way too much. Like, they read an annoying amount, but let's be real, most of them don't even fucking read. They just go to subreddits where they read subreddits and they go to Leftbook and read posts by some like fucking 45-year-old, probably pedophile lefty dude who just like tells them like, North Korea is actually fucking poggers and they're eating hamburgers over there. Okay? Everyone finds their own way towards leftist radicalization. But most people just look at the summarization and make up their own fucking identities in the left, and then will never shut the fuck up about it and will be annoying for the rest of their lives. Hopefully they learn to shut the fuck up about it in a couple years after they make that first step. But the first couple of steps is impossible to comprehend. Like, it's just so fucking pathetic and so annoying.
We knew the Americans were determined to find and destroy the tunnel system. They understood, as did we, however Cu Che went, so did the war. It was our determination not to lose even 1 centimeter of the tunnels. It was a contest of wills, resulting in some very fierce fighting. We made a tremendous sacrifice to gain victory. 2 years after its arrival, the United States of America expanded its bombing campaigns across North Vietnam in an effort to break their will to fight. When a North Vietnamese civilian saw the first B-57 bombers open their bomb bays over his home province of Quang Ninh, his first thought was not to flee in panic, but was instead, why is a mother airplane dropping baby airplanes? Having miraculously survived the initial attack, he gathered his family and fled for the nearby caves. He later recalled to a journalist, "People didn't talk about the meaning of the war. We were really confused why the Americans tried to invade our homeland. We hadn't done anything to them." Sadly, the citizens of Vietnam had much more to fear than American bombs. When Viet Cong guerrillas went to ground among the rural peasantry, US forces responded by declaring any villages with a suspected VC.
The reason why I don't trash talk and our kitties